There's a light that burns once every year, when the world breathes in and everything seems to go still. The Celts called it Samhain, the dying of the year, a night when the veil between the living and the dead grew thin enough for whispers to pass through the dark, and if you listened closely, you might have even heard them answer. Long ago, in a village at the edge of the bog, people knew better than to leave their house after dark. They lit fires in the hills to guide their ancestors, left bread and milk at the door, and whispered blessings through the cold winter nights. But there was one man who didn't believe. A farmer, proud and stubborn, who laughed at the old ways. The dead can't keep their hunger. He said, "I've worked hard for this harvest." While the neighbors offered loaves to the unseen, he bolted his door and drank by his hearth, mocking the flickering fires from outside. Near midnight, the air around him changed. The fire in his hearth sank low, though the wind had not blown. And then came the knocking, 3 times, soft and patient. The farmer stood, half amused and half annoyed. It was late, however. What would anybody be doing at his door? He opened the door. The night was silver with stillness, and there, standing at the gate, were faces he knew. His mother, father, and brother, who had passed from fever years ago, stood at the edge of the gate. They smiled at him with a sinister grin and empty eyes. "You didn't leave us a place at your fire," said his mother. The farmer reached for the words, but none came. The world tilted, the faces faded, and when dawn broke, the villagers found him slumped beside the old hearth, his eyes open, his hand outstretched toward the door. After that night, every house in the valley left out bread and milk for the dead, even when times were lean. Because the dead, you see, they remember who forgot them. And on Samhain, the veil is thin, the fires burn low, and sometimes they come to remind us they're still here. Welcome back, spooky souls, to a special Halloween episode of Let's Talk Spooky. Happy Halloween to you all. Happy Samhain to my fellow Celts and witches alike. If this is your first time stopping in on our show, welcome. Here at Let's Talk Spooky, we dive into the creepy, paranormal, and haunted folklore of some of the most seemingly normal locations, and then some downright scary places too. If that's your vibe, you're in the right place. For the last couple of weeks, our little community has started to grow, and it's so exciting. I love reading your comments. I love reading your feedback, so please keep sending them my way. You still do have a couple of more days to submit listener stories of your spooky paranormal experiences. So if you have one, please be sure to DM me on one of our socials or email me at letstalkspookypodcast@gmail.com. The stories I have received so far are downright spooky, and I am so excited to share them with you. Tonight, though, I want to take you back in time to where the traditions and ceremonies of Halloween began, and how they've shifted from ancient magic to the scares we recognize today. So light that jack-o'-lantern, turn out the lights, and let's talk spooky. It's easy when looking through the lens of modern horror films and haunted houses, even spooky Halloween decorations we use today, and mistaking Halloween for something sinister or evil. But in its oldest form, there was nothing evil about this night. You see, the traditions of Samhain was never about worshipping darkness. It was about understanding it. The Celts didn't fear death. They saw it as a part of an endless rhythm. The bonfires, the disguises, the offerings to the dead, these weren't acts of delivery to something demonic. These were gestures of protection, gratitude, and remembrance for those we'd loved and lost. When the Christian Church later adopted the festival into All Hallows Eve, a sense of reverence didn't vanish. It simply changed its language. People still prayed for the departed. They still lit candles in the window and guided souls home. They still shared food and drink, gathered by firelight to remember those who came before. The prayers were softer now, less about fear and more about longing. Mothers prayed for children lost to illness, widows for husbands taken by war. Families broke bread not in sacrifice, but in remembrance. Across Ireland and Britain, the boundaries between the church and the hearth, they blurred. Priests might ring bells to call the faith to mass, but outside, villagers knelt to the same flames that had burned on the Samhain nights for generations. A quiet blending of old faith and new. They left soul cakes on the doorstep, each one a prayer in the pastry form, sweet, round, and marked with a simple cross. The poor and devout would go door to door offering blessings for the dead in exchange for these cakes. Every bite was said to help free a soul from purgatory. But even as the Latin prayers rose through the autumn air, older rhythms still pulsed beneath them. The crackle of the fire, the whisper of the wind through the field, the reminder that this night had always belonged to both the living and the dead. The church may have renamed it All Hallows Eve, but for the people it was still the same sacred night, a time when love, memory, and superstition met beneath the same stars. Halloween wasn't born from evil, it was born from empathy, from a simple human need to remember the ones we loved, to guard them against what we can't see, and to find comfort in the stories we tell when the nights grow longer. And those stories, the ones saints and souls, lights and shadow, are what we'll step into next. Welcoming the end of one year and the beginning of the next, a sacred turning of time when the living honored the dead, and the fires of life rekindled from the ashes of the cold. Every flicker of flame, every offering left at a door, was part of an old rhythm, one that shaped what we now call Halloween. So before we talk about the pumpkins, the trick-or-treaters, we're going to go back to the bonfires, back to the masks, and back to the night when the veil grew thin and something ancient whispered across the winds. When Christianity spread across Europe, the church encountered deeply rooted seasonal traditions like Samhain, woven into the community life for generations. And instead of erasing them, leaders often found ways to adapt them, merging ancient customs with new ones. In the early 17th century, Pope Boniface IV consecrated the Roman pantheon to all saints and martyrs, establishing what would now become All Saints' Day, or All Hallows' Day, a day to honor the holy and departed. A few centuries later, Pope Gregory III moved the celebration to November 1st, placing it directly after the time when people across Celtic world already honored their ancestors. The night before became known as All Hallows Eve, gradually absorbed into the seasonal rituals of Samhain, firelight, feasting, remembrance. This wasn't about stamping out older faith, it was about community, about continuity, about transforming a moment of change and reflection into one that aligned with new beliefs. The themes remained the same: honoring the dead, protecting the living, recognizing that life and death coexisted in each season. In medieval England and Ireland, communities began to practice what was called souling, visiting a home to pray for the souls of the dead in exchange for a small token, a sweet cake, as mentioned in the beginning, even maybe another sweet treat was offered to children who also participated in this act. Children even took up the tradition of singing verses for exchanging of sweet treats. The practice of guising, wearing disguises to either amuse the neighbors or ward off spirits, became more prominent, and it appeared in Scotland and England and Ireland soon after, echoing the Celtic customs of masking oneself from the wandering souls. These weren't dark or sinister rituals. These were acts of connection, of remembrance, of charity, rooted in the faith and folklore alike. And through the gradual blending of customs, the familiar rhythms of Halloween began to emerge. Candles glowing in the night, families gathering by the fire, prayers, stories crossing from sacred to spectral. Whether it was a saint vigil or a harvest fire, the heart of the season remained the same. A moment to honor what came before, to keep the light burning against the darkness. In the Highlands, people donned masks and cloaks as a practice of guising, disguising themselves not only for the custom's sake, but to confuse wandering spirits that potentially may pass through the veil. Lanterns were carved in turnips that glowed in the dark, their faces grinning and keeping omens away. Bells rang from church towers, hymns rose through the smoke, and yet the older heartbeat of Samhain, it was still there, pulsing beneath the hymns. The same thin veil, the same night when the living and the dead might share the same air. Halloween as we now know it was born in that in-between, not for wickedness, not even for worship of darkness, but from centuries of human need. For centuries, all Hallows Eve was meant to do was honor the holy and remember the dead. But there's always the stories, those other ones, that don't quite make it into the scripture, that do settle a little bit on the darker side of Halloween. Stories of restless souls, still walking the grounds, unable to find their way home. They say one of them was a man, too clever for heaven, but too wicked for hell, a soul the devil himself refused to claim. And on a cold October night, when the mist clung low to the fields, some say his light still burns, a single ember in a hollowed-out turnip. This is the legend of Stingy Jack. Long ago in the misty land of old Ireland lived a man some locals called Stingy Jack. Jack was a clever man, clever enough to outdrink publication and outwit the priest, but his gift was mostly for trouble. He lied, he cheated, he took whatever he could get. So naturally one night in a tavern, the devil himself came calling. Jack, half drunk, half amused, didn't panic. Instead, he made a deal. He asked the devil to buy him one last drink before taking his soul away. The devil, curious and perhaps a little entertained, agreed. When the ale was gone, Jack offered him a trick. "Turn yourself into a coin," said Jack. "I'll pay the barkeep. Then you can change back and we'll be even." The devil laughed, snapped his fingers, and turned into a silver coin. Jack snatched it up and dropped it into his pocket, right beside the small cross he'd been carrying the whole time. The devil was trapped. Desperate, he begged for release, and Jack struck up a bargain with him. The devil could go free as long as he promised not to take Jack's soul for 10 years. The devil agreed and vanished into smoke, and Jack, as usual, stumbled home victorious. But 10 years came quick, and when the devil returned, Jack was ready. He asked for one last request: a single apple from a nearby tree. The devil climbed up to fetch it, and as soon as he did, Jack carved the cross into the trunk of the tree, trapping him once again. This time, Jack made the devil swear to never take his soul to hell. The devil, fuming, agreed. But when Jack finally died, you see, heaven didn't want him, and neither did hell. So, barred from both realms, Jack was left to wander in the darkness between worlds, a restless soul where nowhere to go. The devil, perhaps out of spite or pity, tossed him a single burning coal to light his way. Jack placed it inside a hollowed-out turnip and carried it as a lantern. And ever since, on All Hallows' Eve, people in Ireland carved out lanterns from turnips in their gardens, making faces that were meant to frighten away Jack's wandering spirit. But when Irish immigrants came to America, they found the pumpkin, a larger and much easier thing to carve, and it perfectly suited to hold a flickering flame of light. And that's how the jack-o'-lantern was born. Not just a decoration, but a warning, and a reminder of the soul still trapped in the darkness, caught between heaven and hell, carrying a light through the long nights of the dead. Jack's wandering light faded into folklore, but his fire, it still carried every Halloween night. And today, people still lit lanterns, told old stories, but now they do it with a smile. The fear has softened into curiosity, and the rituals are more games. They bob for apples, they burn nuts for omens, they gaze into mirrors, hoping to glimpse the face of a true love. Halloween has changed again. No longer is it the night to hide from spirits, but it's the night to dance with them. This welcomed the witching night. By the time Jack's story had made its way across Europe, the fear of spirits had softened into something else entirely, a fascination. The fires still burned on All Hallows' Eve, but now they flickered beside bowls of water and plates of apples and candles and mirrors. The night had changed shape again, becoming what people began to call the witching night, a time for magic, for play, and for tempting fate just a little bit. In the 18th and 19th century, Halloween was a night of divination. Long before Ouija boards and horror movies, people believed you could use the veil's thinness to see the future. In Ireland and Scotland, young women peeled apples into long strips and tossed them over their shoulder. If it landed in the shape of a letter, it was said to reveal the initials of their future husband. Others dropped hazelnuts into the fire to test love's endurance, a nut named for each suitor. If it burned steadily, the love would last. If it popped and hissed, the romance would end in heartbreak. Even the simple act of bobbing for apples was a kind of fortune-telling. Whoever caught the first apple would be the next to marry. These weren't just games for amusement. They were quiet rituals that were carried by candlelight in cottages and farmhouses across Great Britain, England, and the early Americas. It echoed of ancient rites made safe through laughter. But as with all things played too close to the veil, there were stories that reminded people to be careful of the unknown. One tale from Lancashire, Scotland, tells of a young woman named Elizabeth who joined a group of friends on Halloween divination. They'd heard that if you walk backwards down the lane at midnight, holding a candle and a mirror, you'd see the face of the person you were destined to marry, and they would stand just over your shoulder. Elizabeth tried it. She walked alone, she whispered the charm, her candle trembling in the wind. But what she saw wasn't the face of a beloved. It was her own face, pale and lifeless. Her reflection flickered through views that seemed almost underwater-like. The others found her fainted in the lane, and the candle extinguished completely, and the mirror cracked in half. She never spoke of what she saw, but that story seemed to linger. After that night, few dared to play the game again. So even in the most playful form, Halloween never forgets its roots. That delicate dance between curiosity and caution. Costumes, too, carried a plural purpose. What began as a disguise of confused spirits began to evoke a playful masquerade. In the Scottish Highlands, villagers wore animal hides or cloaks, sometimes darkening their face with ash. By Victorian era, masquerade parties turned into eerie, elegant balls. Masks of lace and bone and silk and soot danced among firelight. And the same instinct carried forward into modern trick-or-treating. To become something else for that night allowed you to walk among spirits without fear. Because Halloween has always belonged to the living and the dead. A shared night where we laugh at our fears, court the unknown, and remember ancient fires that once burned against the dark skies. Today, we think of Halloween as candy costumes, pumpkin spice lattes, right? But every piece of it, every candle, every carved out grin, it carries an echo of something much older. The jack-o'-lanterns that sit, patiently waiting for trick-or-treaters on our porch, are descendants of turnips carved from the Irish Stingy Jack. The costumes we wear that began as protection, meant to trick spirits that walked the earth when the veil was thin. And the sweets we hand out, the small candy offerings at the doorstep, were once soul cakes given to exchange for prayers of the dead. Even the laughter has a root. The Celts believed that joy itself was a form of protection, that laughter kept the darkness from settling too close. But just because the centuries have softened the fear, it doesn't mean it's gone. Every Halloween, there's still a story. Quiet ones, but ones that remind us just how thin the veil can truly be. And I have just one of those stories to get you in the mood for tonight's festivities. Sent in by a listener who wished to remain anonymous, this tale is called The Porch Light. A few years ago, in a small Ontario town, a woman named Sarah moved into a century-old farmhouse. She was just divorced, had 2 kids, and was eager to give them a proper Halloween. You know, the one with pumpkins and candy, the whole bit. That night, after her kids went to bed, Sarah sat by the front window, watching the jack-o'-lantern flicker on the porch. By now, the street was empty, and the leaves were blowing down the dark pavement. Then, she noticed the porch light was off. Frowning, she decided she would go fix it, and she went to the front and flipped on the switch. And then she went back inside. But a few minutes later, it went off again. Thinking it was a loose wire, she opened the front door, and this time, not only had the porch light gone out, but so had her jack-o'-lantern. Cursing slightly under her breath, she bent and relit it. And as she struck the match, she saw it. A pair of footprints in the frost, right beside the pumpkin. They were small, child-sized, but her kids were asleep upstairs, so who made these footprints? The wind hissed through the trees, carrying some faint echo of laughter from far off in the distance. And then the porch light flickered once more and went back on. Thinking, it's her imagination and faulty wiring. I mean, it was an old house and all. She went inside and found both of her children still fast asleep in their beds. But their bedroom window, the one overlooking the porch, was wide open. Every year since, Sarah still carves her pumpkin, but she leaves the porch light burning all night because for some reason, she believes those little footprints were just coming to take a look at her pumpkin. It's for the lost soul, she said. And sometimes, when the street is quiet, she swears she hears that little child laugh. Halloween may have its challenges through the centuries of faith and folklore, but its soul remains. A night to face the darkness together, to remember those who walked before us, and to keep a small flame burning against the cold, long nights ahead. So wherever you are this Halloween, light your candle and maybe keep your porch light on a little longer, and maybe leave a little something by the door. Because on this night, even now, as we sit here and we wait for trick-or-treaters, there's something about the air, something about the veil. You can feel its thin essence around you. And maybe, just maybe, where we believe our story ends this Halloween night, it might be where it begins again. So from fires of Samhain to the glow of porch lights, Halloween will always be here. And it'll always be more than just trick-or-treaters and spooky stories. It's a night that remembers, a night that invites the living and the dead to share the same flickering flame for just a little while. So keep those lanterns on, keep those pumpkins burning, because you never know who might show up. And thank you guys for listening to tonight's episode. This episode of Let's Talk Spooky was narrated by me and written and produced by our team here at Let's Talk Spooky. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, do be sure to follow, rate, and share this podcast. Not only does it help our little community of spookies find other spooky friends, but it also allows us to keep sharing these creepy, wonderful tales. If you have your own hometown story, haunted legend, or spooky event, you still have a couple of days to share them with me. I'm so excited to share these terrifying tales with you on our next episode. So until next time, stay curious and stay spooky. Happy Halloween, friends.